Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our staff lecture for this month. We don't normally meet on a Thursday, so this is quite unusual. Thank you for making a special effort to come. I know if it's not your normal day to be here, it's good to welcome you. Today we had our staff meeting in the morning, and we realised that exactly 10 years ago, on this very day, was the 200th celebration of CMJ's ministry at the big church in London, in Spitalfields, when the late Bishop John Taylor gave the sermon. I don't know how many of us were there, but that was a very special day. And to think it's a decade of gone, it's amazing. I mean, so only special things happen on Chris's birthday, it seems to me. So. Absolutely, yes. So lots of special things happening. So it's great to make these connections. And actually, yesterday, when we would have had our staff day, was actually the anniversary of the founder of CMJ, Joseph Frey, being baptised. So again, it's a special time to remember God's faithfulness in the past to individuals like Joseph, to a ministry, and of course to Israel as a nation. Lots of exciting things to remember and to reflect upon. Now, if you've been coming to our lectures over the last few months, you know that we've had lots of interesting input. Last month we actually had cheese and wine, thanks to Paul and Janie Hames. So that's the one to go to. I thought I've just got to go to one this year. It will be the cheese and wine. But and then before that, I spoke on biblical hermeneutics, and that's going to come out as an olive press paper in the next few weeks. But today we're delighted that one of our colleagues, Jane Moxon, is going to be speaking on the Pilgrim Fathers and CMJ. And she's also going to be talking about a potential tour in 2020, which is the 400th anniversary of the Pilgrim Fathers travelling to America. I think Jane will say a little bit about the context of her research into the Pilgrim Fathers, but it originally came out of her sabbatical. One of the lovely things about working for CMJ, and there's so many lovely things, is that we have a sabbatical every 7 years, an opportunity for a couple of months study and reflection, and also a chance to have a rest. And Jane had an opportunity to go to Israel and also to think a little bit about the Pilgrim Fathers and the relationship to God's purposes, and particularly the way in which the Pilgrim Fathers understood their role in terms of restoring the church and how they connected that to their hopes for Israel. So, with no further ado, let's welcome Jane as she speaks on Pilgrim Fathers and CMJ. Thank you, Jane.
Will it reach over here? No. I'd rather have it high up where I can see it.
You can move the lectern and just you can put it up there.
Can I do that? Yeah, thanks. The title of the Pilgrim Fathers and CMJ is Understanding the Place of Jewish People in God's Plan and Roots of Christianity. Now, we take it for granted. We just know that our faith is based on Judaism. But a lot of the church still don't know that, and they certainly didn't in days when Jewish people were not allowed living in Britain, when the Roman Catholic Church was the church of the day, and you couldn't understand the Bible because you couldn't read it in your own language, and so slight problems. Now, if you've ever read a book by Howard Morgan called Leaves from the Olive Tree, in one of his chapters he has the most brilliant opening. He says the church lost 4 things. They lost the Jewish roots of the faith, they lost the work of the Holy Spirit, they lost the way to personal salvation through Jesus, and they lost the Bible because it got taken out of their language into Latin and Greek and Hebrew. And so he said, but in the modern era, God is restoring those 4 things to the church in reverse order. So first of all, You have the Bible coming back into your language. Then you have the way to personal salvation through Jesus. Then restored is the work of the Holy Spirit. And finally, the Jewish roots of the faith. And that's exactly what has happened and is still going on today. So that's really what I was looking at in trying to work out a connection between the Pilgrim Fathers and CMJ. And the reason for that is because next year it's the 400th anniversary of the sailing of the Mayflower, which took the Pilgrim Fathers to America. And as a result of that, there'll be a lot of celebrations, a lot of interest, a lot of Americans coming over. And I thought, if there's a connection, we as CMJ can put on a tour for our American counterparts, so that CMJ America, plus their friends and family and others, might like to come over and see where the Mayflower sailed from, see where the people came from, and see where CMJ started, and just do a tour of Britain with all those things in mind. And so that's what I started on. It actually also started because at that time there was quite a bit of trouble in Israel, and people were saying, oh, there's going to be a war, there's going to be a war. And I thought, well, we could do tours, we could do them in Britain. And that's when all this kicked off. So just looking at this, I actually gave this part of the talk last year, but I'm just going to whiz through it again, because by doing that, it will refresh our minds as to what we're talking, the background of all of this. I really want to get onto the tour, and I want to show you what's going to happen on the tour, where we're going to go, and the cost, etc. So, William Tyndale, one of those who translated the Bible, and you know the story about William Tyndale, you know how they pursued him to the Netherlands, and how he eventually was burnt at the stake. But I read that apparently he was strangled before, which, although revolting and horrible, was perhaps a mercy over burning at the stake. But the point is, what he did, and having the word printed, set the word free, the living word that could then go into every home. No longer could the establishment hold sway over the people and control them, because now God could speak to his own people. Now, Martin Bucer, he was a German Protestant reformer, and he was at Cambridge. Now, you're going to find that most of these people, these Puritans, and then also the Separatists, the Pilgrim Fathers, came from Cambridge. They studied at some point in Cambridge, not that they lived there as children. So, and Martin Bucer had a great influence on the people, on the theology of the day, on the students, and he believed in the restoration of the Jewish people. And why? Because as soon as you've got the Bible in your own language, like I said, the Bible's been restored, then the way to personal salvation, then you read about the work of the Holy Spirit, and finally, the Jewish roots of the Christian faith. Now, as they would read the Bible, as he read his Bible, he saw God had made a covenant with the Jewish people. And he also realised that they were going to go back to their land one day. And so he influenced quite a lot of our people, but I'm not going to go into detail about that. You can read it, and I'm sure you perhaps know quite a bit of it. So Cambridge then, being a centre for Puritanism, and all those people I've listed there, which I'm not going to pick out apart from two of them, were influenced by Bucer and others like him. And they all were at different Cambridge colleges, as you can see. So, hello, do come in. If you'd like to just sit down there, yeah? So I'm just telling people the background of the Puritans in Britain, basically when the church was reformed. One of the men who was influenced was Robert Brown. He was born in the 1550s, he died in 1633, and Brown had a massive influence over quite a lot of people, and so they became the Brownists. He was the founder of the Brownists, and that was a precursor of Separatists or Pilgrim Fathers. So he went to Corpus Christi, Cambridge, all the others different Cambridge colleges. Two other men who got it about the Jewish people, Thomas Brightman from Queen's Cambridge and Sir Henry Finch. Now, all the others began to understand this. It became strong within the Puritans. And in fact, Emmanuel College, Cambridge, was set up as purely a Puritan college. So Britain had become Protestant, hadn't it, when Henry VIII wanted to marry again. And that was in 1532. And having become Protestant, in inverted commas, it was really like a sort of English Roman Catholic church. They kept the same traditions and so on. But there was a group of people in the church who didn't want to keep the same traditions as Rome, as the Roman Catholic Church. They wanted to move on. They wanted to reform the church, to clear out the clutter from churches, and they wanted a more pure and simple way of worship within the church. And so the Puritans wanted to reform the church from within. So you might be thinking of modern day groups who are trying to reform the church from within our establishment. But you also had the separatists. Now the separatists, or the Brownists, wanted to keep themselves, be ye separate from the established church, and became independents. Now this was all happening under the Tudors, under Henry VIII and his son and so on. But as soon as the Stuarts came back, and Elizabeth of course, but when 1603, when James I gets the throne, it's gone back to the Stuarts, and then it's more serious. There's problems for those who are dissenters, those who do not conform to the religious way of the time, which is the Church of England, and the people had to meet in secret from 1603 on, which of course is when our people started to try to leave Britain. But in many ways you could say the Puritans were like the Pharisees of Jesus' time, because if you think back, there were 4 major types in Bible times, weren't there? The Pharisees, who stayed within the established synagogue, the established temple, the established religion, and they tried to reform from within. In his time you had the Sadducees, who were hand in hand with the Romans, and who paid to become high priests, who were going along with the establishment, who were just cooling it with them and compromising right, left and centre. And then you also had the Zealots, didn't you, who would go and fight against the Romans. They wanted by force to get rid of them. And you had the Essenes, or the people down by the Dead Sea, if that's not their name. And that would be like the separatists. They came out from among them and set up their own community in order to keep themselves pure. And it struck me that this is really, you could apply this to the church today, and you could apply it to the church in the 17th century. So the Puritans, like the Pharisees, the separatists, like the Essenes. And it's out of the separatists that our Pilgrim Fathers come. Yes, they're Puritans, but they're like another brand, another strand of Puritan. They're the separatists. So where do they come from? Funnily enough, they come from round here, just slightly north. They come from more around where Chris and I live. So it's North Nottinghamshire and a bit of Lincolnshire, North Lincolnshire, a little tiny bit of South West Yorkshire, but it's really North Nottinghamshire. And these villages, you can see Retford in the middle at the bottom. You can see Babworth to the side, Scrooby up there near to Bawtry. You go around and you've got Gainsborough in Lincolnshire, and you've got down to Sturton the Steeple, and you've basically got the main Pilgrim Fathers sites where they came from. So Richard Clifton, who was a Church of England Anglican minister, he was a Brownist, and eventually he had to give up his church, and he went to Amsterdam in 1608. He died 8 years later in 1616. You have William Brewster, who lived in Scrooby. The dates are there, between 1560 and 1644. William Brewster was a senior elder and leader of the community in Plymouth. He was one of the 2 who went on the Mayflower. Reverend John Robinson, Sturton the Steeple, he was from Corpus Christi, Cambridge, was a fellow. Now he became a leader of the church in the Netherlands, and he stayed there. And he was buried in Peter's Church, Pieterskerk in Leiden. William Bradford from Austerfield, he went on the Mayflower, and he became the governor of the Plymouth community. So from this area, some amazing people came, and we should be very proud of them. Now that's the church at Babworth, All Saints Church. It actually has been rebuilt. I think it was rebuilt in about 1660, but it's near enough, going back to the time of the Pilgrim Fathers, and that was where Richard Clifton had his living. And it was to that church that two of the other guys used to walk 10 miles about every Sunday and back again afterwards. So they called him, when they're talking about Richard Clifton, they refer to him as the noble white-haired man, older than the others, and having led the way, died on the 20th of May 1616 in Amsterdam. He'd been the vicar of Babworth, where Bradford and Brewster walked each way listening to his preaching. He had massive influence on these younger men, and that with their Cambridge days forming the way they thought. Okay, so St Wilfrid's in Scrooby, another famous church, is where William Brewster, after his year in Peterhouse in Cambridge, came back home to become the postmaster and also an English teacher. So that again is how the villages line up together. So Scrooby Manor was his home, and actually they used to have secret meetings in his home for a while, because the Church of England, of course, eventually got on to Richard Clifton, and as with most of them, he was dismissed of his position with the Anglican Church and seen as a terrible rebel. And so Brewster invited Clifton to come to his home, to live in his home, actually, in Scrooby Manor, and so the church met there. I don't know why I seem to have so many of these maps, but it's no bad deal. There was only one when I put it together, I thought. Now, William Bradford was baptised in St Helena's, this little church here in Austerfield. That's another village close to Scrooby. And the original font is still there, so you can go and see where he was baptised. William Brewster first met him when he was a sickly young orphan, but William grew into a passionate God-fearer, escaping to Holland with the Brewster family when he was 18. And then the Bradford family home was the manor house in Austerfield. So William became a great leader, a Moses, and he led the people out, and he kept very detailed plans of everything that happened. And it's thanks to that we know so much about the community in Plymouth. What did you do? That's not your fault, is it? We've got this map between every single slide, don't we? I think it decided on its own, yeah. It might be. Parish Church of St Peter and Paul in Sturton-the-Steeple. So Sturton-the-Steeple, another of the Pilgrim Fathers' places of residence, and it's John Robinson who was born there. So he was born there in 75, 76-ish, and he was the first child of John and Anne Robinson. So he was a pastor and founder of those who went to North America in the Mayflower, but he died in the Netherlands because he became their leader. But when they got to the Netherlands and they were building up the church there, he said that he should stay. He didn't believe he should make that journey to America. He believed he should stay where he was, and he did so till his death, leading the church there. Now, why didn't they stay in the Netherlands when they went there? Well, they didn't stay because after so many years, the Netherlands was known for its freedom of religion. It was accepting, the Jewish, when they were thrown out of Spain, the Jewish community went to the Netherlands, where they were accepted, allowed to live freely. And the Netherlands had an ethos of hard work. And so everybody who lived there worked hard, didn't play so much. And the Pilgrim Fathers who ended up there found that this work was quite arduous, and they were finding it hard to find jobs when they got them. They were having to work all hours. They couldn't pass the word on. They couldn't do quite what they wanted. But perhaps more than that, they were concerned for their children, because as their children were growing up, they found that the influence of the world in the Netherlands, the freedom, the liberation and the liberal standards, that was having an effect on their children. And the children were beginning to assimilate and become Dutch and lose their faith. And so they felt that it was time to move on. Well, this is all similar. It's all the same sort of thing. So I'm not going to read through that or talk about that. There was a John Smythe of Gainsborough. He's another man that's very instrumental in all of this. But, yeah. So the Mayflower finally sailed in 1620. And wait a minute, we have, as I said already, Bradford was one of them. Now, on the Mayflower, it took them 60 days. I'm not going to go into, they set off, they came back, they set off, they came back. We can talk about that when we look at the tour details. But on the route, just like the Hebrews had made a covenant with God, God made a covenant with them, really, but they were in covenant with God, and they took their method, their way of living, as a model for the way they should live. So they made a covenant, they would make a covenant. And they, in their covenant, if you read it on the screen, it says, no justification for a hierarchy or an elaborate ritual in worship. And they take Bible verses to back these things up. God changes the world through revivals, like in the Reformation. The Bible has unfilled prophecy, especially in regard of the second coming. And that was to be preceded by two great events, the conversion of the Jewish people and the spreading of the gospel throughout the world. Now we know that, and we know that CMJ, our founders, saw the same two things, that the end was coming, Jesus was going to return, but before he would, two things had to happen, and CMJ knew this, and we trot it out when we talk about CMJ. The gospel must spread throughout all the world, and the Jewish people must return to their own land. So the Puritans got it, most of them. The Pilgrim Fathers, the separatists or Brownists, they got it, and CMJ got it, because CMJ came out of the same revelation that God showed to these people, because it wasn't very long before tracts were being written about the Jewish people, and there were about 10 different little booklets or tracts by late 1600s, and already it was being put into people's talks and sermons, and so this was becoming the accepted theology amongst these people. There's the Pilgrims writing their compact or their covenant on board. Now they did it on board the ship because there were 102 people that boarded that ship, but half the people were either the sailors or traders just going out there, not believers. So roughly half were actual Christians. And because of the pulls of the world and the conversations and things, they thought we mustn't be divided amongst ourselves. We mustn't start being pulled in this direction or that, because when we get there, it's going to be so hard that we need a set of rules. We need to know what we are doing. And when they drew this up, it was a fantastic help, and it did keep them together. They basically were believing in democracy, that everybody's vote counted for the same thing, and you can't read it all there, but it's all there on that slide. I'm not going to read all that through. But they had to keep to these teachings. They needed to do that to survive. And they did, which is absolutely quite a miracle. So there they are, getting on the ship in Portsmouth, in Plymouth, but some people would say it was actually Southampton that they sailed from the second time. And others, as a vicar I spoke to in London this last week, or the week before, he said, there's good evidence to say that they sailed from Rotherhithe in the Thames. But that's, of course, where the ship was built, and maybe some people got on it there, but not our men. Our men got on it down south. So I want to give out to you now the brochures to do with the tour, and we're just going to go through what the tour entails and what you might expect if you want to come. It's aimed at the American market, but there is no reason why the Brits shouldn't come. And if there's enough who want to do this, we could even do a trial run this autumn, even if we only do half of it, just to see what it's like. Don't be put off by the price. That's what I've put at the moment. I'm hoping I can bring it down a bit. We will see. I don't know. If we share for the moment, I'll see. Well, this is enough. He's a brochure. You don't have your own. Just enough. Look at that. Oh, Mary.
For all of us, that's very nice of you, Philip. I think there is liquor up the Mayflower down the south.
Yeah.
There'll be liquor, but it wasn't quite a bit.
So it's the 12th of September. I've got another one there. 12th of September, 2020. And the idea here is the Americans will arrive on the 11th or the 12th, and apparently there's a red-eyed flight overnight. So the plan is the bus and I will pick them up from Heathrow Airport, go to the hotel where the others have collected the day before from different parts of America, have breakfast together and set off straight up to North Nottinghamshire. Apparently it's not too bad. Well, it isn't too bad. I've done it plenty of times. It's only about 3 and a bit hours. So, and then when we get into North Nottinghamshire and book into the hotel, give them a chance to freshen up, we'll then set out to Epworth. Now, Epworth has nothing to do with our period of history, except it's the home of Wesley, the Wesleys. And, of course, the Wesleys, also non-conformists, actually, or you should say real believers in Jesus. They, in a sense, well, they came out of this as well. It all follows, doesn't it? It all flows after the Bible has been given back to the people in their own language. The way of personal salvation has been discovered, and as Wesley found, the work of the Holy Spirit has also been restored to God's people when his heart was strangely warmed, and the Jewish roots of the Christian faith. So all of this is coming, and so we're going to go round the rectory, and as well as that, we're going to go around the village of Epworth, because in the village of Epworth, there are certain places where, when they read out some bits of Wesley's talks and his, it's really quite moving. It just so happens that there is a man who is an expert on the Pilgrim Fathers, and he has a business called Pilgrims and Prophets, and he happens to live in the town next to us called Retford. Now, I've never met him, but I have heard of him. I think I might have heard him speak sort of like 15 years ago or something on some subject. But he did history at Cambridge, and he's set up this business now. He's also a consultant in schools, passionate to keep the living word alive and to show people their Christian heritage. And so he is going to be our tour leader for the first couple of days on this tour. And it's absolutely great because he's an expert in this. And when we go to the villages and we talk, we hear about the different people, he knows all about them and more besides. So we're going to stay at the Old Bell, Barnby Moor, Retford, that night. And we're going to have dinner there. So it'll be dinner, bed and breakfast at the Old Bell. And that night, after dinner, Adrian Gray will give us a lecture on the Pilgrim Fathers, so that we'll hear all about them. We'll have talked about Epworth, we'll have seen about the Wesleys. We'll now move back a while to the Pilgrim Fathers, and we'll hear all about them before we go and look at the villages the next day. Now, the following day, what you might be surprised about is, the thought is that everybody will dress in costume. So I'm looking into having these costumes, or not the whole costume, but because I'm sure you can wear something underneath that people already own, but all the things that make them look like pilgrims. So the women will have a certain sort of colour with the bonnets, the men will have those high hats, and they'll be able to tuck their trousers up into long socks. And we'll set out and we'll go into Badworth Church until all the other villages, dressed as Pilgrim Fathers would have done, looking like they did. And when we have already been to Sturton the steeple first, we'll come back and we'll have a service. We'll go to the church service at Badworth at 11 o'clock, dressed as pilgrims. And as well as the sermon and the service that we'll listen to, we're going to have a little bit of a talk, kind of like a second sermon, but really just quotes from his sermons, from Richard Clifton's sermons. And we might feel ourselves transported back 400 years into the 1600s as we sit there. And I think there'll be a lot of fun. It's a good photo opportunity as well. From there, we're going to go to Scrooby, and there's a pub there called the Mayflower, and still in costume, we can go and have lunch there, which would freak out the rest of the people. I might have to adjust it slightly, but anyway. And
so
so
we put our sizes on the application.
yeah. Well, actually, you see, if women wear a long skirt,
You can just pull it in.
yeah, because what makes them look like pilgrim mothers is basically the kind of collar, the bonnet, and the apron, and the cuffs on the sleeves. So if I have cuffs made, and the person you've got a long top on, you can just put the cuff over there, and like I said, the men can just pull the trouser leg up and put the long socks on. It's kind of like in black shoes. We've done it really. Just need the hat and the collar. And actually, the black and white, which is the sort of typical Puritan look, that was really reserved for the Sabbath and for Sundays, for going to church. The rest of the week, they wore colours. But on many pictures I've seen, they were wearing colours coming out of the church and so on. So I think it's a bit of a myth about them being so dour as to be all in black and white all the time. It's me that's in black and white. So I think any colour. I should be writing this in great length to people to explain what to wear. So if people come with the basics, then we add all the other bits. Yeah? You're up for that, Alan? It'll be a lot of fun, just imagine. It'll be all right when we get to Plymouth as well. So anyway, we're going to go around, as I said, all the different villages. We go to Gainsborough Old Hall, and there it's a fantastic building. Has anybody been to Gainsborough Old Hall? Yeah, I mean, it hasn't changed, has it? It really just takes you back in time. And the family who lived there were very sympathetic to these people, to these separatists. And it's not 100% known, but it is believed that they met there for their church as well, that they all moved and that they were looked after by them. And also, this John Smythe came from Gainsborough, so we're definitely going to go there, and we'll be able to have a cup of tea in the afternoon there. And after that, there's another village which I've not heard of, but Adrian Gray has told me is absolute jewel of a place called Glentworth. Has anybody heard of Glentworth? You must know, Chris, out of all the villages. Well, no. Anyway, this really godly family that were there that influenced people, looked after the believers in the area, and there's a lot to be seen there. But then we're not going to go back to the Old Bell, we're going to move on to Lincoln that night so that we can wake up in Lincoln and see what's near there. It just helps with the travel a little bit. When we arrive in Lincoln, we will be able to have dinner, but you'll be able to walk on the streets by yourselves, you'll be able to have a look. There's the cathedral, there's a side of the cathedral there that's lit up at night that looks quite stunning. There's the Jews' house, because Lincoln was a centre, one of 3 main centres really early on for Jewish people. And the Jews' house belonged to a merchant who was the richest Jewish man in Britain, if not in the whole of Europe. I can't think it was that, but certainly in Britain. And of fame. It's now been turned into a rather exclusive restaurant. And unfortunately, have you been? Does it say that he was the most famous just in Britain? The richest man in Britain or in Europe?
Don't talk about it.
But it's on the outside. I think there's a big... It was good though. Yeah. Oh well.
Do I remember the plaque?
But the trouble is it's too small to take a busload of people. I've quoted everything that I've done on 30 people. But it may be, if it's twice that many, we might, I'll do it twice over. Anyway, so that'll be really nice in Lincoln, and we can talk about the Jewish community there. We can talk about Little Hugh of Lincoln. This is of Lincoln, yeah. And the blood libel. When this little boy went missing, he was found dead in a field. The Jews were blamed, and it was said, as it is with all these blood libels, that they were using the little boy's blood to make matzah for Passover and a load of rubbish like that. So that's that. Then we stay overnight in Lincoln. The following day, we go to Boston. Now, Boston, in 7 or 8, I've forgotten, some of the pilgrims tried to go off to the Netherlands as early as that. Well, some had to different places, but our lot tried to go there. And the captain of the blooming ship ratted on them. And so they were arrested, and they were put in the clink for a month. after which they really had to run for it and hide and sort of keep below the parapet, as it would be. There is a famous thing called a stump, Boston Stump, and it's the highest church tower in Britain or Europe? In Britain. And it was used by sailors out at sea as a marker to know what they were doing. Anyway, from Boston, and when we've heard all about the happenings there, we're going to go down to Cambridge. And in Cambridge, we'll check into Christ College of Cambridge University, where we're going to stay for the night. And we're going to go then on a Christian heritage tour of Cambridge with a really fantastic guide who knows his stuff, and he's going to take us around the colleges that the Pilgrim Fathers attended, where the Puritans were, show us how it happened, what was going on at the time. And they're also going to take us to Holy Trinity Church. Now, why Holy Trinity Church? Because Holy Trinity Church was the home, was the living of Charles Simeon. Charles Simeon was with CMJ for 50 years. He was the John Stott of the day. He was a fantastic theologian, but unlike many today, he was completely on board with God's purposes for the Jewish people. And he went round the country speaking for CMJ over those 50 years. So, I think that's fantastic. And he was also the vicar of Holy Trinity. I've been there and tried to get a meeting. But at least they did show me the vestry, and they showed me his briefcase and his umbrella, which makes you feel connected, doesn't it, through time, back to the person who owned them. So we're going to go and hear about him and the connection that CMJ has with Cambridge. Staying in Christ College will be really nice, and I think the Americans will be really pleased to stay in Cambridge University. And we're also going to have a formal dinner that night. Not in their big dining hall with the people, because the students haven't come back yet, have they? But we'll be in our own special room with our own special dinner. And that'll be something to remember. The following day after breakfast, we pack and leave, and we head off for Plymouth. So, on the way to Plymouth, we're going to call at Stansted House, which is Rowland's Castle in East Sussex. It's the border of East Sussex and Hampshire. And we're going to go there for lunch. So Stansted House, in case you don't know, is connected to CMJ because a very rich benefactor for CMJ called Lewis Way lived there. It's a beautiful country house, massive grounds. And he was left a fortune by another man who had the same surname but was not related, as long as he used some of it for Christian work. Well, he saved the day for CMJ in 1815 by giving us a cheque, £10,000, which in today's money would be, what would 10,000? How many? Is that all? Yeah, I would have thought it was more millions, but get the finance manager to tell us. Anyway, so but not only did he give us the money, but he went all over Europe and into Israel and just a whole lot, didn't he? Meeting with important people, with leaders of countries, and speaking on behalf of the Jewish people, and also telling them how important it was to reach the Jewish people with the gospel, the good news. And as well as that, he set up a college in his own home for new Jewish believers so that they could come and study there. I think they weren't always that well behaved, but there are some really rich stories coming out of that time. But what a wonderful chap. And the chapel, although the house is different, it's the same place, but his house had a big fire, as houses often did. But the chapel is the original chapel, so we'll be able to have lunch, look around the house, and go to the chapel and sit there and hear about him. And it's a fantastic place. There's a small walled garden as well. So from Stansted House we go on to Plymouth, but via Southampton. Southampton vies with Plymouth as being the original place the Pilgrim Fathers left from. Now, it's true that both the Mayflower and the Speedwell, the sister ship that was intended to travel to America with the Mayflower. They were meant to go in tandem to help each other and protect each other and take more people. But the Speedwell wasn't terribly strong. It was a bit of an old boat, and it went out, and then it had to come back to the coast. And I think it crawled its way down to the Dart. I'm not sure if that ended back in Southampton, but anyway, the Mayflower also went down the coast onto the River Dart at Dartmouth, and then ended up in Plymouth, where our people boarded it. So we will go from Southampton. We'll just spend a little bit of time looking at West Quay, where they set sail from, hearing about that. And then we'll go down to Plymouth. And we'll arrive at Plymouth in the evening, so we will have eaten on the way. And the following day is the major celebration day for the sailing of the Mayflower, because they actually left on the 6th of September according to the Julian calendar. And I planned everything for the 6th of September, not having realised that there was such a change in calendars. But anyhow, they apparently, when Europe changed to the Gregorian calendar, it jumped forward 10 days, making the celebration the 16th of September. So, I mean, I actually rang them up to say, this is your official website I'm ringing up, how is it that you're celebrating on the 16th? I thought they left on the 6th. Oh, well. And he told me all about the calendars. So that's something for you. And so the 16th is now the official celebration day, and there's lots of things happening. So again, I think the pilgrims will dress in their costumes and walk onto the quay where there's major celebrations. There's, the ship. There's kind of all different stuff going to happen. A ship, and there's also the Barbican area, which we can walk around, where they would have stayed in the little houses and so on before they boarded the ship, and where they might have done their shopping. Well, actually, I think they did the shopping in Southampton. And then also the steps they went down have to be the original steps. And there's also a museum which we'll be able to see as well, which will be really fascinating, on the Pilgrim Fathers. And also, of course, one of our main men ended up in Plymouth, no less than Michael Solomon Alexander, Bishop Michael Solomon Alexander. Now, he'd come across to Norwich originally, to the one in Essex, what's it called? Colchester. He came to Colchester to be a tutor. The people there were some Christians there who were after him. He was a rabbi, and he thought, not in your life, and off he went to Norwich. Unfortunately for him, in Norwich were another couple of women who were believers in Jesus, who tried to get to him, and after a while he'd had enough of it, and he flees quite a long way down to Plymouth, where there so happens to be an Anglican clergyman who says, "Oh, I've always wanted to learn Hebrew. Will you teach me?" He's gone there as a shochet, which is the ritual slaughter, and also as a tutor, and on saying yes, he would teach him Hebrew, the guy says, "Let's start with Isaiah 53." Which is so anyway, he didn't stand a chance, did he? God was on his case, as we would say. And Michael Solomon Alexander became a believer in his own Messiah. Still Jewish, still a rabbi, a teacher, and a believer in his Messiah, Yeshua. And he ends up as the Hebrew professor at King's College London. And when he is there, of course, he's become on board with CMJ. And when the British government say to CMJ, the Prussians and we have agreed to do a Protestant bishopric in the Middle East, we would like you to choose the first bishop. And first of all, we were going to choose McCall, who's not a Jewish person, and he graciously, is very, very bright, intelligent man, stood down and he said it should be a Jewish man. And so Solomon Michael Alexander was chosen, and he went across in 1841 to Israel with his wife and his 12 children. Now, I think he was trying to set up his own tribe in Israel, because and I don't know how she managed with 12 kids to get all that way overland to Israel in those days. Because when you think about it, that was 20 years before Mark Twain went to Israel. And when Mark Twain went, the travel writer, the American travel writer, he travelled the land of Israel and he said, "This is awful. And he said, "This is awful." 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 And he said, "This is There's nobody here. It's empty. It's malarial swamps and desert. There are no trees. Jerusalem is a walled city. The plague is in Jerusalem. And it's full of disease. And it's so small that if you walk fast, you can get round it in an hour. That's what he said of Jerusalem. He said, I went 5 days and never saw anybody. It's like a land forlorn, waiting for her prince to kiss her into life. Oh. And he came. And look what's happened now. So that is a fantastic story of Solomon Alexander. We'll be able to hear that down in Plymouth and see where his church has gone, where he went, but there's another church just nearby, and it's near the synagogue where he attended. Might be able to get in there. And the baptistry is there, the font is there, and also there's a big chunk of stone out of the original church, which they've put in the church we shall visit. Can't think of the name of it, can you? St Andrews, right. We shall not forget St Andrews. So that's what we're doing in Plymouth. So we stay another night in Plymouth, and then before we leave Devon, we're just going to go to Dartmouth and see a little bit that happened there, because it's very quaint, and it reminds you of that era, and it does have an impact on our story. And then as we come back up to London, we travel back up to London, on the way, we'll hear about Joseph Frey and the beginning of CMJ, because when we get to our hotel and check in, we are going to be in the Greenwich area, and then we will be going to Rotherhithe. Rotherhithe is a little village. It's just south of the Thames, on the Thames, and it's kind of something that's had a time warp. Modernisation seems to have passed it by, and it's used for a lot of films as a backdrop. Les Miserables, for example, it wasn't Paris they filmed it in, it was Rotherhithe in London. And there is actually a film studio just there that was responsible for that. So we might be able to see the outside of that at least, if not look into it. So we'll go around the docks, and then we've booked a dinner already at a very famous pub that I was told was not to be missed, called the Mayflower. And just now they've okayed it that we can go there that night for dinner. As I looked on my computer before I came out. So the next day, we're going to, after we've looked round Rotherhithe, we're going to get up, and on the bus we're going to tour Clapham, where the Clapham sect was. Now the Clapham sect were a group who believed as we do, and led by, well, not led by, but one of whom was William Wilberforce. So we'll be able to see the house he lived in, and so on. Then we will drive into the east end of London. We'll just have a look at Bethnal Green, where Palestine Place was, and just talk about that. And then we'll be dropped off by Brick Lane in the east end of London for a tour of the area where the Jewish immigrants came at first, when they were coming over from Europe and Russia at the end of the 19th century, so the 1860s and perhaps really the 1880s and 90s, but I think some had come sooner than that. And those people were all settling in the east end of London. So although their shops are owned by other people or they've been changed into other things, there are plenty of Hebrew signs or Yiddish signs on the walls, and it's really worth having a good look around that. Bevis Mark's synagogue is in that area, and I'm hoping, well, we can go in it, although it costs £5 now to go in to look around. And that's the oldest Jewish synagogue, well, the oldest synagogue, in Britain. And after that, we'll go to Christchurch Spitalfields, as long as I can arrange the opening. And inside Christchurch Spitalfields are all the plaques that came from Palestine Place of when our founders had died, and it wrote about them. Fascinating history of our people, of CMJ's people. And also they have the font in there where many of the people were baptised in Palestine Place in the Jews' chapel. So from the Jews' chapel that font has come.
And that font was restored by CMJ 10 years ago.
It was, especially for the bicentenary. Yeah. And we had our massive celebration there. Did you come to that?
I think work.
Yeah. Well, you'll be able to go this time. And then you'll be able to see it. because it's really worth a visit. It's quite a remarkable church actually as well. So after we've gone around the east end of London, we've looked into these two places, we'll go back to Greenwich in the bus. The coach will pick us up. We'll have had lunch somewhere. And when we go back, I've put, if there's time, well, that's just what I need, thank you. We're going to go to the Greenwich Observatory. You can't be so near to the Greenwich Observatory where time is measured across the whole world, take a group of Americans and not see it. So we're going to have to go and see that. And then at the bottom of that, just 11 minutes walk down the hill, on the edge of the Thames, is the Cutty Sark. They do afternoon teas in the Cutty Sark. Have you been there as well? Oh, is it good? Is it worth going? It's £14 a head, but I thought we'd go to that. So the following morning, the last full day together, we go by boat into the middle of town. So we get on at Greenwich Pier, we go to Westminster Pier, and we're going to have a tour of the Houses of Parliament. And have a little Christian heritage guided tour around London. That'll just take the morning, and the rest of the day is free till the return boat back to Greenwich. And then in the evening we'll have dinner together in the hotel, and afterwards we will consolidate all that we have learned with our bonnets and hats. And there's a picture of us all at the end. Oh, and then where's that little thing gone? Oh, here we are. Because actually, there's the Mayflower. Chris likes that picture, don't you? It does something for him. Actually, it is nice because it looks like it's fresh and it looks like it's in full sail. But I like that one. There's something majestic and I don't know. It's just incredibly beautiful a picture. Anyway, personal preference. So you may sign up for the tour now if you wish. It needs. Yeah, there's a few details. There are a few details need to be secured. Most of it is secure. The bus companies I've got prices from. I just need to choose which one. I've got all the details for everything, and the cost. Well, we can make it. We can make anything happen, Alison. We will make wheelchair access. But, yeah, the cost I'm hoping to bring down a little bit. But I had to put it there because that's realistic. And we'll see.
Don't rush away, Jane. I'm sure people may have one or two questions, but just for the sake of the recording, thank you so much for sharing that, which came out of your sabbatical and our reflections. Well, I thought it was very interesting. I like the idea that Cambridge was the home of Puritanism. Obviously, it still is. And there we are. I thought it was also very interesting, Jane, what you were saying about these 4 areas where the church has lost and been restored. I kind of heard that before, but it kind of just rings true in my spirit, that, isn't it? You know, that's really, really helpful. And I thought it was also interesting, that idea of connecting those different groups in the time of Jesus, Second Temple Judaism, and trying to make some connections with different revivalist groups in Britain at that time. I thought that's an interesting idea. And then, of course, with your map, which you showed us a few times, how all this work is connected. I mean, often when God does something, there's a geographical location to it, isn't it? Yeah. The places are important, as well as times and ideas. And being, that particular community of people, I found was really, really interesting, the way that was sort of resonating in my mind. You also mentioned Lewis Way, and that's part of the tour here. And again, if you go onto the CMJ website, there's 4 people talking about Lewis Way, particularly his work in supporting CMJ, but also the work in terms of Jewish emancipation, which is a key part of Lewis's life and ministry as well. And that's all. You can download all the talks on the website. But the tour looks absolutely brilliant, and I'm sure, with the American market and this sense of anniversary and history, but also making this connecting to our ongoing ministry today. I mean, the danger when we do history, and some of us are quite keen on history and history buffs, that we almost become nostalgic and we kind of live in a previous age. But this is rooting in the present as well as in what we're doing now, tour of Parliament, all those issues. I think makes it come alive, doesn't it?
Yeah, you could put those 4 types of Second Temple Judaism into political parties, perhaps, as well.
Yes, and who knows where that might end up. But
I think as well, next year being the 400th anniversary of the Pilgrim Fathers sailing the Mayflower and so on, and also linking it to CMJ, I think there's a tremendous opportunity for revival next year. I think both evangelism, preaching the gospel, getting it out there, and revival within the church, getting back to biblical Christianity, getting back to teaching the Bible. And that's really also one of my things that's motivated me and guided me to do this.
We've got a few minutes before we've got to actually formally close, but any particular questions to Jane, either about the practicalities of the tour or by the wider implications? Yes, one question here.
Do you think the Americans would also be a bit interested in how their constitution was founded by the Pilgrim Fathers, particularly the Second Amendment?
Yes. Yeah, that came a bit later, didn't it, really?
It came later,
Yeah.
but I just wonder
It came
how
based on,
much...
yeah. We can do that. What I did think for the actual tour, I plan to do quite a few papers on different aspects, like there'll be more on CMJ, different things. And that's one that could easily be one of those papers. So that when they actually start the tour, there'll be several of those on different topics, which they'll be able to look at. And then when we do have our meetings, it's not every night that we're going to have a talk or a gathering, because I think people are zonked out after a day of so busy. But we will be able to discuss things like that.
Thank you.
They built a replica of the Mayflower. It was in Southampton. It's slightly smaller. Did you ever see it?
No, but the Southampton say they were the Mayflower left. Well, they did, you see. The Speedwell Mayflower left on there, but then when they had to come back in, they came lower down.
Is the replica still there?
I don't know.
It's smaller. I have seen something. It's a smaller version.
It's a smaller boat
Yeah.
than the actual Mayflower.
Yeah, I've seen that.
You've seen it?
But I don't know where it was. But I definitely, because I noticed it was smaller.
I saw it.
Right, maybe when I sail back in sometime.
Yes. I got a feeling it might even be moved to Dartmouth Harbour. Because I know John probably would have gone for a meal on that, but I know my wife's been for a meal on that boat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But they're going
I
to
thought
have
it
a
was
lot of
Dartmouth,
boats in the harbour on the 16th in Plymouth, from America, from the Netherlands, from Britain, and the Indians, the North American Indians in America. I've forgotten what they're called. What are they called? Oh. Huh? No, there's a name. I thought, where's that? And then anyhow, there are going to be boats from all those places.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments? Well, thank you so much, Jane, for your input. And again, if you look at the website, I know Jane's hoping to write some of this up as an olive press paper, which will give you a good sort of 5,000-6,000 word overview of what she's been teaching. It may come out in a little bit later, hopefully in time for the tour. So, Jane, thank you so much, and we appreciate that, and we will look forward to being on the tour, some of us, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But thank you very much.